The bell above the door chimed softly as Sarah Martinez stepped into Murphy's gun and tactical, her worn combat boots silent against the polished concrete floor. The familiar scent of gun oil and leather holsters brought back a flood of memories. Some she welcomed, others she'd rather forget. At 28, Sarah carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who'd seen more than most people twice her age, though her unassuming appearance often led others to underestimate her completely. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Behind the counter stood Tom Murphy, a burly man in his 50s with graying hair and skeptical eyes that had seen every type of customer walk through his door. He'd run this shop for over 2 decades, and in that time, he'd developed an almost supernatural ability to size up customers within seconds of meeting them. Young woman, civilian clothes, no visible signs of military or law enforcement background. In his mind, she was probably looking for a basic home defense weapon, or maybe something her boyfriend had sent her to pick up. "Help you with something?" Murphy asked, not bothering to look up from the inventory sheet he was reviewing. His tone was polite but dismissive, the kind reserved for customers he assumed wouldn't be making any significant purchases. Sarah approached the counter slowly, her hazel eyes scanning the impressive array of firearms displayed behind the glass. Handguns, shotguns, assault rifles. Murphy's shop was well-stocked and clearly catered to serious enthusiasts and professionals, but what she was looking for wasn't on display. "I'm interested in purchasing an M24 SWS," she said quietly, her voice steady and professional. Murphy's head snapped up, his eyebrows rising in surprise. The M24 sniper weapon system wasn't something people casually inquired about. It was a precision rifle system primarily used by military snipers, capable of accurate shots at distances exceeding 800 meters. The weapon system, based on the Remington 700 action, was serious business and expensive. An M24? Murphy repeated, setting down his clipboard and giving Sarah his full attention for the first time. "Ma'am, that's a pretty specific request. Most folks come in here asking for something to protect their home or maybe do some hunting. The M24 is, well, it's in a completely different category." Sarah nodded, unfazed by his reaction. "I understand. I'm looking for the complete system, the rifle, scope, everything. I assume you can source one." Murphy studied her more carefully now, taking in details he'd missed during his initial assessment. There was something about the way she carried herself, a certain stillness that spoke of discipline and training. Her posture was perfect without being obvious about it, and her eyes held a focus that made him slightly uncomfortable. "Look, miss," he began, then paused, realizing he didn't know her name. "Martinez. Sarah Martinez." "Ms. Martinez, the M24 isn't something I keep in regular inventory. It's a specialized piece of equipment that costs more than most people's cars. And to be perfectly honest, I'd need to know why someone like you would need something like that before I'd even consider ordering one." The statement hung in the air between them, loaded with assumption and barely concealed condescension. Murphy had dealt with plenty of wannabe snipers and military enthusiasts over the years, people who'd watched too many movies and thought they needed military-grade equipment for weekend target shooting. In his experience, most of them lost interest quickly when they learned about the cost and complexity involved. Sarah's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in her eyes. Not anger exactly, but a recognition of the judgment being passed on her. She'd encountered this attitude countless times before, in training, in the field, and apparently in civilian life as well. The assumption that someone who looked like her couldn't possibly have legitimate use for such serious equipment. "Mr. Martinez," she said, her voice taking on a slightly different tone, still respectful, but with an underlying steel that hadn't been there before. I appreciate your concern about proper placement of such equipment, but I assure you I have both the training and the need for an M24 system. Murphy crossed his arms, still skeptical. Training, huh? What kind of training would that be? You take some weekend course somewhere? The question revealed just how little he understood the woman standing in front of him. Sarah had to suppress a small smile at the irony. Weekend course. If only he knew what kind of weekend courses she had taken over the past decade. Something like that, she replied, choosing not to elaborate. She'd learned long ago that sometimes it was better to let people reveal their assumptions rather than trying to correct them up front. Murphy shook his head, becoming more animated now. Look, Sarah, can I call you Sarah? I've been in this business for 20 years. I've sold guns to everyone from weekend warriors to local law enforcement. The M24 isn't a toy. It's a precision instrument that requires extensive training to use effectively. The scope alone costs more than most complete rifle setups. Now, I'm not saying you can't handle a rifle, but there's a big difference between plinking at targets and operating a sniper system. These things are designed for very specific purposes, and frankly, I have a hard time imagining what someone in your situation would need one for. Sarah listened to Murphy's lecture with the patience of someone who'd heard variations of it many times before. She understood his perspective, even if she didn't appreciate the condescending delivery. From his point of view, she was just another civilian with unrealistic expectations about military equipment. He had no way of knowing that she'd spent the last 8 years of her life becoming intimately familiar with systems far more complex than the M24. Mr. Murphy, she said when he finished, I understand your concerns about responsible sales practices, but I'm not some enthusiast looking for a trophy piece. I have legitimate professional reasons for needing this equipment. Professional reasons? Murphy's tone suggested he found this claim dubious at best. What kind of professional work requires an M24? Are you law enforcement? Private security? Sarah hesitated for a moment. The truth was complicated, and she'd learned that full transparency wasn't always the best approach in situations like this. Her current work did involve security consulting, but that was only part of the story, and probably not the part that would convince Murphy to take her seriously. I do specialized consulting work that requires precision shooting capabilities, she said carefully. I can provide references if necessary. Murphy laughed, not unkindly, but clearly dismissive. Consulting work, right. Look, Sarah, I've heard every story in the book. People come in here claiming they need military-grade equipment for consulting or private security or whatever. 9 times out of 10, they just want to play soldier at the range. He leaned forward, adopting what he probably thought was a helpful tone. Here's what I'd recommend instead. If you're really interested in precision shooting, start with something more reasonable. I've got a beautiful Remington 700 in .308 that would be perfect for long-range target shooting. Good glass, solid platform, and about 1/3 of the cost of what you're asking for. Sarah appreciated that he was at least trying to be helpful now rather than simply dismissive, but his suggestion revealed just how far off base his assessment of her needs was. A standard Remington 700 was a fine rifle, but it wasn't what she needed for the work she had lined up. I appreciate the suggestion, but I specifically need the M24 system, the complete package with the Leupold Mark IV scope and all accessories. Murphy's expression shifted again, this time showing genuine surprise. The fact that she knew the specific scope typically paired with the M24 system gave him pause. Most casual enthusiasts wouldn't know those kinds of details off the top of their heads. You seem to know something about the system, he admitted grudgingly. But knowing specifications and actually being able to use the equipment effectively are 2 different things entirely. True, Sarah agreed, but I assure you I have the necessary experience. Experience with what exactly? Murphy pressed. Have you actually fired an M24 before? Do you understand the ballistics involved, the environmental factors that affect long-range shooting?
Each question felt like a small test, and Sarah found herself growing slightly irritated despite her efforts to remain patient. She understood that Murphy was trying to be responsible, but his assumptions about her capabilities were becoming increasingly grating. "I do fire the M24 system," she said. "Multiple times, actually. I'm familiar with the ballistics, the environmental factors, and the maintenance requirements." Murphy studied her face, looking for signs of deception or exaggeration. Sarah met his gaze steadily, letting her confidence speak for itself. After a long moment, he seemed to reach some kind of internal decision. "All right. Let's say I believe you have some experience with the system. Even if that's true, the M24 isn't something you use for casual target shooting. These rifles are designed for specific military applications. What exactly do you plan to do with it?" It was a fair question, and one that Sarah had expected. The challenge was providing an answer that was truthful and sufficient to convince Murphy without revealing more than she was comfortable sharing. Her current work did involve security consulting, but that was only part of the story, and probably not the part that would convince Murphy to take her seriously. "I do specialized consulting work that requires precision shooting capabilities," she said carefully. "I can provide references if necessary." Murphy laughed, not unkindly, but clearly dismissive. "Consulting work, right. Look, Sarah, I've heard every story in the book. People come in here claiming they need military-grade equipment for consulting or private security or whatever. 9 times out of 10, they just want to play soldier at the range." The conversation had reached an impasse. Murphy needed more information to justify the sale, and Sarah wasn't in a position to provide the kind of details he was looking for. She could sense his growing frustration, mixed with a grudging respect for her knowledge of the system. "What if I told you about the longest shot I've ever made?" she asked quietly.
Murphy's eyebrows rose at the unexpected question. In his experience, people who made claims about extraordinary shooting feats were usually the least qualified to handle serious equipment. But something in Sarah's tone, quiet, matter-of-fact, without a hint of boasting, made him pause. "I'm listening," he said, crossing his arms and leaning back against the wall of rifles behind him. Sarah took a breath, mentally preparing to share a story she rarely told. It wasn't that she was secretive about her military service, but the specific details of her deployments weren't something she discussed casually. This shot, in particular, carried weight that went far beyond mere technical achievement. "Afghanistan, 2019. I was deployed with a Marine Scout sniper team, providing overwatch for a convoy route that had been hit by IEDs 3 times in the previous month." Murphy's posture shifted slightly. The mention of Afghanistan and Marine Scout snipers carried immediate credibility in his world. These weren't weekend warrior credentials. This was the real deal. We'd set up an observation post on a ridgeline overlooking the valley where the attacks had occurred. Intelligence suggested the insurgents were using a compound about 800 meters from the road to coordinate their attacks and store explosives. She paused, remembering the heat of that day, the way the sun had beaten down on their position and the weight of responsibility that came with every decision in that hostile environment. The problem was, 800 meters was just the beginning. The compound was built into the hillside with multiple levels and excellent concealment. The high-value target, the bomb maker we'd been tracking for months, was using the upper level as his workshop. From our position to his location was significantly further than 800 meters. Murphy found himself genuinely interested now, his skepticism giving way to professional curiosity. "How much further?" 1,437 meters. She replied without hesitation. "I know the exact distance because I ranged it multiple times, cross-referenced with our spotter, and confirmed with GPS coordinates." The number hung in the air between them. Murphy knew enough about long-range shooting to understand the significance of that distance. At nearly 1,500 meters, they were talking about a shot that pushed the absolute limits of what was possible with standard military rifles, even in ideal conditions. "That's," Murphy began, then stopped himself. "That's an extraordinary distance. What were you shooting?" M24A2, with 175 grain federal gold medal match ammunition. Loopholed Mark IV scope, 3.5 to 10x magnification. The technical details continued to impress Murphy. These weren't the kind of specifications someone would know from casual research. They were the precise details that came from hands-on experience with the equipment. Environmental conditions? He asked, falling into the technical discussion almost unconsciously. Wind was variable, 5 to 12 miles per hour, shifting between 9 and 11 o'clock. Temperature was 97 degrees Fahrenheit, humidity around 30%. Altitude was approximately 4,200 feet above sea level. Sarah's recall of these details was immediate and precise, the kind of information that gets burned into memory when lives depend on accuracy. Murphy was beginning to realize that his initial assessment of this quiet woman had been completely wrong. At that distance, in those conditions, Murphy shook his head. Even if you could calculate the ballistics perfectly, there are so many variables. Wind changes, mirage effects, the target movement. The target wasn't moving, Sarah said quietly. He was focused on his work. We'd been observing for 3 days, documenting his patterns. Every morning at 0847 local time, he would sit at a workbench positioned in front of a window on the upper level. He would work there for approximately 45 minutes preparing improvised explosive devices. The clinical way she described the scene belied the complexity and danger of the situation. Murphy could imagine the pressure. A single shot at an impossible distance with the knowledge that failure might mean more coalition casualties on that convoy route. "Who is your spotter?" he asked. "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, 12-year veteran, 3 deployments. He'd made confirmed kills out to 1,100 meters himself, so he understood what we were attempting." Sarah's eyes grew distant as she recalled her spotter's voice, calm and professional, even as they pushed the boundaries of what their equipment could accomplish. Rodriguez ran the calculations 3 times. Wind calls, elevation adjustments, even factored in the Magnus effect from the bullet's spin at that extreme range. We had one opportunity. Intelligence indicated the target was planning to move to a different location the following day. Murphy was completely absorbed in the story now, his earlier skepticism replaced by professional fascination. He'd heard stories of extraordinary shots before, but the level of technical detail and the matter-of-fact way Sarah described the situation suggested this wasn't fabricated. What was the setup time? We took position at 0500 hours. First light wasn't until 0630, so we had time to get established without being observed. The shot window was narrow, maybe 10 minutes when the light conditions were optimal and before the heat started creating too much mirage. Sarah paused, remembering the weight of the rifle, the way her heart rate had slowed as she entered the zone of absolute focus that separated successful snipers from everyone else. At 0847, exactly on schedule, the target took his position at the workbench.
Murphy leaned forward, completely engrossed in Sarah's account. The shop around them seemed to fade away as she transported him to that Afghan ridgeline where split-second decisions carried life and death consequences. "Rodriguez gave me the wind call," Sarah continued, her voice steady but carrying the weight of memory. 7 miles per hour, quarter value from the left. At that distance, even a small error in wind estimation could mean a complete miss, or worse, hitting an unintended target. She paused, remembering the feeling of the rifle's stock against her cheek, the way the scope's crosshairs had danced slightly in the heat shimmer rising from the valley below. The ballistic calculation called for 34.2 MOA of elevation adjustment. At 1,400 meters, the bullet would drop over 30 feet from the line of sight. The flight time would be just over 2 seconds, an eternity when you're dealing with a living target who could move at any moment. Murphy found himself holding his breath as Sarah described the technical challenges. As someone who'd sold precision rifles for 2 decades, he understood just how many variables could affect a shot at that extreme range. Wind speed, air density, humidity, even the rotation of the Earth became significant factors. What about the ammunition? At that distance, every grain of powder matters. Federal gold medal match, 175 grain Sierra Match King boat tail hollow points, lot number tested and verified. We'd chronographed the same ammunition the previous day to confirm our ballistic data. Average velocity was 2,580 feet per second, with a standard deviation of 8 feet per second. The level of preparation impressed Murphy. This wasn't a lucky shot or a spur-of-the-moment decision. It was the result of meticulous planning and professional-level attention to detail. Rodriguez confirmed the range one final time using the laser rangefinder. 1,437 meters exactly. The target was positioned perfectly, silhouetted against the light-colored wall behind the workbench. I had a clear sight picture, optimal lighting conditions, and a stable shooting position. Sarah's breathing had unconsciously synchronized with the memory, slow and controlled, the way she'd been trained to manage her physiology during critical shots. The first pressure on the trigger is always the hardest. You've done all the calculations, accounted for every variable you can control, but at some point, you have to trust your training and execute. Murphy nodded, understanding the psychology of precision shooting, even though he'd never faced anything approaching the stakes Sarah was describing. I controlled my breathing, found my natural respiratory pause, and began the trigger press. Straight back, steady pressure, no lateral movement. The crosshairs were centered on the target's upper chest. At that distance, I couldn't afford to aim for anything smaller. The memory was vivid in Sarah's mind. The weight of responsibility, the absolute stillness required, the knowledge that countless coalition forces depended on eliminating this bomb maker who had already claimed too many lives. The shot broke clean. Through the scope, I could see the bullet impact immediately. Center mass, exactly where I'd aimed. The target dropped instantly. Rodriguez confirmed the hit and called in the successful engagement. Murphy was quiet for a moment, processing the implications of what he'd just heard. A confirmed kill at nearly 1,500 meters was extraordinary by any standard, but the clinical precision with which Sarah described the shot spoke to a level of training and experience that went far beyond typical military service. He began, then stopped, searching for adequate words. That's one hell of a shot. But I have to ask, how do I know you're not just telling me an impressive story you heard somewhere? It was a fair question, and Sarah had anticipated it. She reached into her pocket and withdrew her phone, scrolling through photos until she found what she was looking for. Rodriguez took this about 10 minutes after the shot, she said, showing Murphy the screen. The photograph showed Sarah in full combat gear, holding an M24 rifle with a woman's smaller frame clearly visible despite the military equipment. In the background, the Afghan landscape stretched out in harsh, unforgiving detail, but what caught Murphy's attention was the date stamp and the professional quality of the documentation. This wasn't a casual snapshot, but rather the kind of operational photography used for after-action reports. The mission was classified for obvious reasons, but the shot itself was documented and verified through proper channels. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez wrote a detailed after-action report that included range confirmation, environmental conditions, and target verification. Murphy studied the photograph carefully, noting details that supported Sarah's story. The equipment was exactly what she described, the terrain matched her description of the Afghan deployment, and most importantly, the woman in the photo carried herself with the confident bearing of someone completely comfortable with the weapon in her hands. Preparing and narrating the story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I'll be honest with you, Sarah, Murphy said, handing back the phone. When you walked in here asking for an M24, I figured you for another wannabe who watched too many movies. I get people like that all the time. They want military equipment but have no understanding of what's actually involved in using it effectively. He paused, reassessing everything about their interaction. Sarah's quiet confidence, her precise knowledge of technical specifications, her matter-of-fact recounting of an extraordinary shot, it all painted a picture of someone far more qualified than he had initially assumed.
But this, Murphy continued, gesturing toward her phone, this changes things completely. A confirmed kill at 1,437 meters isn't just impressive, it's the kind of shot that gets written up in sniper training manuals. Sarah nodded, understanding his shift in perspective. I know how it looked when I walked in here. Most people see a civilian woman asking about military equipment and make assumptions. I'm used to it by now. Murphy felt a flush of embarrassment at the accuracy of her assessment. He prided himself on being a professional judge of character, but his biases had clearly interfered with his evaluation of this particular customer. So, when you say you need an M24 for consulting work, you're talking about serious professional applications. Exactly. I left active duty 18 months ago, but there's significant demand for personnel with specialized skills in the private sector. Security consulting, training contracts, specialized protection services, the skill set transfers well to civilian applications. Murphy nodded, his mind already shifting from skeptical gatekeeper to professional equipment supplier. What kind of timeline are we looking at for delivery? The M24 system isn't something I can just pull off the shelf. I understand. What's typical for a special order like this? Depends on the specific configuration you need, Murphy replied, moving to his computer to check his supplier networks. The base rifle system is usually available through my law enforcement channels, but the complete package with all accessories can take anywhere from 6 to 12 weeks. Sarah considered this timeline. Her contract didn't start for 2 months, so there was adequate time for delivery and zeroing the rifle to her specifications. What about the scope? I'll need the loopholed Mark IV, specifically the 3.5 by 10x 40mm model with the M1 turrets. That I can probably get within 2 weeks, Murphy confirmed, his fingers flying over the keyboard as he checked inventory systems. The scope mounts, bipod, and other accessories shouldn't be a problem either. The rifle itself will be the long lead item. As Murphy worked, Sarah found herself appreciating his transformation from skeptical shop owner to professional equipment supplier. Once he understood her legitimate need for the equipment, he'd shifted into problem-solving mode, focused on getting her exactly what she required. Now about cost, Murphy said, turning back to face her. The complete system, with everything you've specified, is going to run about $15,000. That includes the rifle, scope, mounts, bipod, and a basic accessory package. Are we talking about a cash purchase, or will you need financing options? Cash, Sarah replied without hesitation. I'll need to take delivery at a specific location rather than here at the shop, if that's possible. Murphy raised an eyebrow at this request, but after what he'd learned about Sarah's background, he wasn't particularly surprised. Private delivery is possible, though it adds some complexity to the transfer paperwork. Where are we talking about? I'll be working out of a facility in Colorado, mountain environment, elevation around 8,000 feet. I'll need to zero the rifle at altitude anyway, so it makes sense to have everything shipped there. Colorado, Murphy mused. That's high altitude work. Different ballistic considerations than sea level. Sarah nodded. The thinner air reduces drag, which affects both trajectory and wind drift calculations. At the altitudes I'll be working, the ballistic coefficient improvements become significant factors in long-range accuracy. Once again, Murphy found himself impressed by Sarah's technical knowledge. Most customers who bought high-end rifles couldn't explain basic ballistic concepts, let alone discuss atmospheric effects on bullet performance. I can arrange shipping to Colorado, no problem. I'll need specific delivery instructions and someone authorized to receive the firearms shipment, but that's all routine paperwork. Sarah provided the necessary details, including the FFL dealer who would handle the Colorado transfer. As Murphy processed the information, he found himself genuinely curious about her upcoming assignment. If you don't mind my asking, he said carefully, what kind of consulting work requires this level of precision shooting capability? Sarah considered how much to reveal. The specifics of her contract were confidential, but she could provide general context without violating any agreements. High-profile protection services, she said. There's a growing market for personnel who can provide overwatch security in remote or challenging environments. Some clients require protection in locations where traditional security approaches aren't practical. Murphy nodded, understanding the implications. In an era where wealthy individuals and high-value executives faced increasing security threats, the demand for specialized protection services had grown significantly. Someone with Sarah's background would be extremely valuable in that market. Makes sense, he said, and I imagine the pay scale reflects the specialized nature of the work. It does, Sarah confirmed, enough to justify investing in proper equipment rather than trying to make do with less capable alternatives. As they worked through the final paperwork details, Murphy found himself reflecting on his initial misassessment of Sarah. It was a humbling reminder that assumptions based on appearance could be completely wrong, especially when dealing with military veterans whose service had taken them into specialized roles. I have to ask, he said, as they neared the end of their transaction. That shot in Afghanistan, 1,437 meters, where does that rank among confirmed long-range kills? I mean, I know the record holders, but that's still an extraordinary distance.
Sarah smiled slightly, the first time Murphy had seen her expression soften during their entire conversation. "It's not about records," she said quietly. "It's about mission success and bringing people home safely." That shot eliminated a bomb maker who was responsible for multiple coalition casualties. The distance was just whatever was necessary to accomplish the mission.
Murphy nodded respectfully, understanding that he'd touched on something deeper than mere technical achievement. In the military, extraordinary shots weren't about setting records or earning bragging rights. They were about saving lives and completing missions under impossible circumstances. The funny thing is, Sarah continued, that wasn't even the most challenging shot I made during that deployment. Distance is just one variable. Sometimes a shorter shot under difficult conditions can be much more demanding than a long shot with ideal setup. How so? Murphy asked, genuinely interested in learning from someone with her level of experience. 2 weeks after the 1,437-meter shot, we had an urban environment where hostages were being held in a compound with limited sight lines. The shot was only 340 meters, but it required threading the bullet through a window opening barely larger than the projectile itself at a steep downward angle with the target partially concealed behind cover. Sarah paused, remembering the complexity of that urban scenario. The ballistic calculations were actually more complicated because of the angle and the need for surgical precision. Miss by 2 inches in any direction and you potentially hit a hostage or fail to neutralize the threat. Murphy was fascinated by this perspective on precision shooting. His experience was primarily with customers focused on achieving tight groups at the range or making clean kills while hunting. The tactical applications Sarah described involved calculations and considerations he'd never encountered. In situations like that, Sarah explained, the M24 system becomes invaluable not because of its maximum range capability, but because of its consistent accuracy and reliability under stress. When you have one shot to get it right, and lives depend on that shot, you need equipment that performs exactly as expected every single time. That's why you specifically need the complete M24 system for your consulting work. Murphy said, the pieces finally clicking into place. It's not about having the most expensive or impressive rifle. It's about having a platform you know intimately and can trust completely. Exactly, Sarah confirmed. I've probably fired thousands of rounds through various M24 systems during my military service. I know how they shoot, how they respond to different environmental conditions, and how to maintain them in challenging conditions. Using familiar equipment eliminates variables and allows me to focus on the mission rather than adapting to different ballistic characteristics. Murphy finished entering the order details into his computer system, then turned back to Sarah with a professional smile. All right, everything's processed. I'll need a deposit of $5,000 to initiate the order, with the balance due on delivery. Given what you've told me about your timeline, I should be able to have everything ready for shipment to Colorado within 8 weeks. Sarah reached into a jacket and withdrew an envelope. Here's the deposit, she said, counting out 50 $100 bills, and a little extra for the expedited processing and special delivery arrangements. Murphy's eyebrows rose as he watched her count out cash with the casual ease of someone accustomed to high-value transactions. Most customers needed financing for purchases of this magnitude, but Sarah was treating it like a routine business expense. I appreciate the business, Murphy said, accepting the deposit and providing a detailed receipt. And I have to apologize for my initial skepticism. I get a lot of people in here with unrealistic expectations about military equipment, and I made assumptions about you that were completely wrong. No apology necessary, Sarah replied. You were being responsible. Equipment like this shouldn't be sold casually, and you were right to ask questions. I'd rather deal with someone who takes their responsibility seriously than someone who will sell anything to anyone without proper vetting. As Murphy prepared the paperwork, he found himself curious about one more aspect of Sarah's story. Can I ask how you ended up in sniper school? That's not exactly a common MOS for women in the military. Sarah's expression grew slightly more guarded, but not unfriendly.
I started as a standard infantry Marine, but I had natural shooting ability that got noticed during training. When opportunities opened up for women to serve in combat roles, I volunteered for Scout Sniper School. That must have been challenging, Murphy observed. Not just the physical demands, but probably some resistance to women in those roles. There was definitely skepticism, Sarah admitted, but the military is ultimately a meritocracy when it comes to combat effectiveness. If you can do the job and do it well, people tend to get past their preconceptions pretty quickly. Murphy nodded, imagining that Sarah's 1,437-meter shot had probably ended any lingering doubts about her capabilities among her fellow Marines. "How many women were in your Scout Sniper class?" he asked. "I was the only one," Sarah replied matter-of-factly. "Out of 23 Marines who started the course, only 11 graduated. I finished third overall in the final rankings." Murphy whistled softly. Scout Sniper School was notoriously demanding, with a failure rate that eliminated most candidates regardless of their background or preparation. Finishing third in a class where 2/3 of the students failed was extraordinary by any measure. "That explains a lot about your knowledge and capabilities," he said. "Scout sniper training is some of the most intensive marksmanship instruction in the world." "It was challenging," Sarah agreed, "but it prepared me for situations like that Afghanistan shot. When you've been trained to perform under extreme stress, with lives depending on your accuracy, civilian applications feel relatively straightforward by comparison." As their transaction neared completion, Murphy realized this had been one of the most interesting customer interactions he'd experienced in years. Sarah's combination of technical expertise, combat experience, and professional demeanor had completely changed his perspective on assumptions about customers and capabilities.
"You know," Murphy said as he organized the paperwork, "I'm curious about something else. That shot you made, 1,437 meters. What was the follow-up? I mean, after you confirmed the hit, what happened next?" Sarah's expression grew more serious as she considered how much operational detail she could share. The immediate aftermath of that shot had involved complex tactical decisions that illustrated just how different real combat was from range shooting. "The immediate priority was intelligence gathering," she said carefully. "Eliminating the bomb maker was only part of the mission. We needed to secure any materials or information in that compound before other insurgents could respond." Murphy leaned forward, fascinated by this glimpse into actual military operations. His experience with firearms was extensive, but it was primarily commercial and recreational. Hearing about the tactical context surrounding precision shooting gave him new appreciation for the complexity involved. "Rodriguez and I maintained overwatch while a squad moved in to clear the compound," Sarah continued. "The challenge was providing cover for our people while simultaneously watching for enemy reinforcements. At that distance, even with perfect optics, identifying potential threats required constant vigilance." She paused, remembering the tension of those 30 minutes as the clearing operation unfolded below. The compound turned out to be a significant intelligence find. The bomb maker had detailed maps of convoy routes, timing information, and enough explosive materials to conduct attacks for months. "So your shot didn't just eliminate one threat, it opened up an intelligence opportunity that prevented future attacks." "Exactly. That's often how these operations work. One successful engagement can have cascading effects that save dozens or hundreds of lives down the line. You don't always see the full impact immediately, but the intelligence analysts piece together the broader picture later." Murphy found himself gaining new respect for the complexity of military operations. In his civilian world, a successful shot meant hitting the target accurately. In Sarah's world, accuracy was just the beginning of a much more complex tactical equation. "What about extraction?" he asked. "After an operation like that, I imagine you couldn't just pack up and walk away." Sarah smiled slightly at the question. "That's where things got interesting. The clearing operation took longer than expected, and we started picking up radio chatter indicating enemy forces were moving toward our position. We had to hold that overwatch position for almost 4 hours while the intelligence team worked. 4 hours in an exposed position. Murphy's military experience was limited, but he understood enough to know that staying in one location that long was dangerous. Rodriguez and I rotated between observation and security. At one point, we had confirmed enemy movement about 800 meters from our position, close enough that we could have engaged, but far enough that it would have revealed our location unnecessarily.
Sarah's description painted a picture of constant decision-making under pressure. Every choice carried potential consequences, and the wrong decision could compromise not just their mission, but the safety of multiple coalition forces. The waiting was actually more stressful than taking the original shot, she admitted. When you're focused on a specific target and task, training takes over and you operate almost automatically. But when you're waiting and watching, with threats potentially developing from multiple directions, the mental strain is significant. Murphy understood how the psychological pressure could build during extended operations. How did it finally resolve? The intelligence team finished their work and we got word that extraction was inbound. But just as we were preparing to move, Rodriguez spotted muzzle flashes from a building about 600 meters away, insurgents who had figured out roughly where the shot had come from. That's when the M24's reliability really mattered. We'd been in position for hours, the rifle had been exposed to heat and dust, but when I needed to engage those new targets, it performed exactly as expected. Multiple targets at 600 meters? Murphy asked. 3 confirmed threats. Rodriguez called the wind and range while I engaged each target in sequence. At that distance, with properly zeroed equipment, it was more about target identification and timing than ballistic complexity. Murphy was struck by how matter-of-factly Sarah described engaging multiple enemies. For him, taking 3 consecutive shots at 600 meters would be an impressive range achievement. For her, it had been a tactical necessity during a dangerous extraction. The whole operation, from the original 1,437-meter shot to final extraction, took about 6 hours. By the time we got back to base, intelligence had already started processing the materials we had captured. Within 48 hours, they'd identified 3 additional IED factories and prevented at least 2 plant attacks on coalition forces. So, that one shot led to shutting down an entire bomb-making network, Murphy said, finally understanding the full scope of the mission's impact. That's the reality of precision shooting in military operations, Sarah explained. It's never just about the shot itself. It's about enabling larger tactical and strategic objectives. The technical skill is essential, but it's only valuable when applied as part of a comprehensive operational plan. Murphy finished organizing the paperwork and looked up at Sarah with genuine admiration. I have to say, this has been one of the most educational conversations I've had in this shop. Most of my customers are focused on equipment specifications and range performance. Hearing about real-world applications puts everything in a completely different context.
That's actually something I'd like to address in my consulting work, Sarah said. There's a significant gap between recreational shooting and tactical applications. A lot of law enforcement and security personnel have excellent marksmanship skills, but limited understanding of how those skills translate to operational environments. Murphy was intrigued by this observation. His shop served a diverse customer base that included law enforcement officers, and he'd noticed varying levels of tactical knowledge even among professionals. "What kind of gaps are you talking about?" he asked. "Environmental factors, for one thing," Sarah replied. "Most range training happens under controlled conditions: consistent lighting, known distances, minimal wind, no time pressure. Real operations involve constantly changing variables that can dramatically affect accuracy." She gestured toward the rifles displayed behind Murphy. "Take temperature, for example. A rifle zeroed at 70 degrees will shoot differently at 30 degrees or 100 degrees. Most recreational shooters never experience enough temperature variation to notice the difference. But in operational environments, you might encounter 40-degree temperature swings during a single mission." Murphy nodded, remembering customers who'd complained about their rifles shooting differently in winter conditions. He'd always attributed it to user error, but Sarah's explanation suggested there were legitimate ballistic reasons for the variations. "Altitude is another factor that's rarely addressed in basic training," Sarah continued. "Moving from sea level to 8,000 feet changes air density enough to affect bullet trajectory significantly. If you don't understand how to compensate, you can miss by several inches at moderate ranges." "Is that something you factor into your Colorado assignment?" Murphy asked. "Absolutely. The facility where I'll be working is at 8,200 feet elevation. Before I can become operationally effective, I'll need to re-zero the rifle at altitude and develop new data for different ranges and conditions. What worked perfectly in Afghanistan won't necessarily work in Colorado mountains." Sarah's attention to these details impressed Murphy. Most customers bought equipment and assumed it would perform identically regardless of circumstances. Sarah understood that effective shooting required constant adaptation to changing conditions. What about psychological factors? Murphy asked. I imagine that's a significant difference between range shooting and operational shooting. Sarah's expression grew more thoughtful. That's probably the biggest gap of all. Range shooting is about achieving perfect groups under ideal conditions. Operational shooting is about delivering effective fire under extreme stress, often with incomplete information and time pressure. She paused, considering how to explain something that was difficult for civilians to understand without firsthand experience. In Afghanistan, when I was preparing for that 1,437-meter shot, I knew that coalition lives depended on my accuracy. I also knew that if I missed, the target might disappear and continue building bombs that would kill our people. That kind of pressure changes everything about how you approach the shot. Murphy tried to imagine that level of responsibility. His shooting experience had always been recreational, where the worst consequence of a missed shot was disappointment or embarrassment. How do you train for that kind of pressure? He asked. Repetition under gradually increasing stress conditions. You start with basic marksmanship fundamentals, then add time pressure, physical fatigue, simulated combat conditions, and decision-making requirements. By the time you're in an actual firefight, the muscle memory and training responses take over. Sarah's explanation reminded Murphy of stories he'd heard from law enforcement customers about the differences between range qualification and real-world shooting situations. Even experienced officers sometimes struggled to transition from controlled training environments to dynamic tactical situations. That's what makes the M24 system so valuable for my consulting work, Sarah continued. It's not just about the rifle's accuracy potential, it's about having a platform that I've trained with extensively under stress conditions. When everything else is unpredictable, having familiar equipment eliminates at least one variable. Murphy was beginning to understand why Sarah had been so specific about needing the exact M24 configuration. It wasn't about having the best possible rifle, it was about having the same rifle she had trained with and trusted in combat. Do you miss it? I mean, the military, the missions, the team aspect? Sarah considered the question carefully. I miss the sense of purpose, she said finally. Military service provides a clarity of mission that's sometimes missing in civilian life. You know exactly why you're there and what you're trying to accomplish, even when the tactical situation is complex. She gestured around the gun shop. In the private sector, the missions are different but still meaningful. Protecting high-value individuals, providing security in unstable regions, training personnel for dangerous assignments. It's still about using specialized skills to keep people safe. Murphy understood that Sarah had found a way to continue serving others while transitioning to civilian life. Many veterans struggled with that transition, but she seemed to have identified work that utilized her skills while providing the sense of purpose she valued. What's the most challenging aspect of the consulting work? Murphy asked. Client education, Sarah replied immediately. Many clients have unrealistic expectations about what's possible or necessary. They've seen movies where snipers make impossible shots under ridiculous conditions, and they expect that to be reality. Murphy laughed, recognizing the phenomenon from his own customer interactions. I get that all the time in here. People want to buy the rifle they saw in a movie without understanding the training and conditions required to use it effectively. Exactly. Part of my job is helping clients understand what they actually need versus what they think they need. Sometimes the solution is extensive training rather than expensive equipment. Other times, the tactical situation doesn't actually require precision shooting. A different security approach might be more effective.
That's what I appreciate about this conversation, Murphy said. You clearly understand the equipment, but you also understand its limitations and appropriate applications. That's unfortunately rare in my experience. Sarah smiled. Military training teaches you to think systematically about problems. Equipment is just one tool in a larger toolkit. The key is choosing the right combination of tools, tactics, and personnel for each specific situation. Murphy found himself curious about the specific nature of Sarah's upcoming Colorado assignment. Without violating any confidentiality agreements, can you tell me more about what you'll be doing in Colorado? I'm trying to understand what kind of consulting work requires this level of precision shooting capability. Sarah considered how much she could reveal without compromising operational security. It's a private security contract for a high-profile individual who's spending time at a remote mountain facility. The terrain and potential threat vectors require overwatch capability at extended ranges. Corporate executive? Politician? Murphy asked. I can't get into specifics about the client, Sarah replied diplomatically. But it's someone whose security profile requires comprehensive protection in an environment where traditional close protection methods aren't sufficient. Murphy nodded, understanding the discretion required in high-end security work. How long is the contract? 6 months initially, with potential for extension. The client is conducting business operations from the mountain facility, so they need consistent security presence rather than just short-term protection. And you'll be working alone or as part of a team? Team environment, Sarah confirmed. I'm the precision shooting specialist, but there will be close protection personnel, electronic surveillance specialists, and coordination with local law enforcement. Modern security operations are very much team efforts. Murphy was fascinated by this glimpse into professional security work. His understanding had been limited to what he'd seen in movies, which apparently bore little resemblance to reality. What's the biggest misconception people have about sniper work? Sarah laughed softly. That it's all about taking extremely long shots at tiny targets. In reality, most precision shooting situations involve moderate ranges, 300 to 800 meters, with emphasis on first shot reliability rather than maximum distance capability. She gestured toward the rifles behind Murphy. A good hunting rifle in the hands of a competent shooter can be effective out to 400 or 500 meters. The M24 system's advantage isn't necessarily maximum range. It's consistent accuracy, reliability under adverse conditions, and the ability to engage multiple targets rapidly when necessary. So the 1437-meter shot you made in Afghanistan was unusual even by military standards? Extremely unusual, Sarah confirmed. Most combat engagements happen at much shorter ranges. That particular shot was necessary because of the specific tactical situation and terrain features. It's not something you'd plan for in most operations. Murphy was beginning to understand that Sarah's Afghanistan experience represented the extreme end of precision shooting, rather than typical military operations. Her skills had been tested under conditions that most snipers never encountered. How did that shot affect your reputation within the military? He asked. It definitely opened doors, Sarah admitted. Word travels fast in the sniper community, and verified long-range kills get attention. I started getting selected for specialized missions and training opportunities that might not have been available otherwise. She paused, remembering the increased responsibilities that had come with recognition. But it also raised expectations. After you make a shot like that, people assume you can perform miracles every time. The pressure to maintain that level of performance can be significant. Murphy understood how success could create its own challenges. Is that part of why you left the military? The pressure? Not primarily, Sarah replied. I completed my enlistment commitment and decided it was time to explore civilian opportunities. The precision shooting skills translate well to private sector work, and the compensation is significantly better than military pay. I imagine it is, Murphy said, thinking about the $15,000 rifle purchase Sarah was making with cash. What's the typical pay scale for this kind of consulting work? Sarah smiled. Let's just say it's sufficient to justify investing in proper equipment and maintaining the training necessary to perform effectively. Clients who need this level of specialized protection are generally willing to pay for proven expertise. Murphy completed the final paperwork and handed Sarah a comprehensive receipt and delivery schedule. Everything should be ready for shipment to Colorado within 8 weeks. I'll call you as soon as the rifle arrives so we can schedule delivery. I appreciate the professional service, Sarah said, accepting the paperwork. And I apologize if I was initially vague about my background. I've learned that leading with combat credentials can sometimes make people uncomfortable. No apology necessary, Murphy replied. I should have asked better questions instead of making assumptions. This has been one of the most interesting transactions I've handled, and I've learned more about precision shooting applications than I knew there was to learn. As Sarah prepared to leave, Murphy found himself hoping their professional relationship would continue beyond this single transaction. If you need any additional equipment or accessories once you're established in Colorado, please keep me in mind. I'd be interested in hearing how the M24 performs in that mountain environment. I will, Sarah promised. And if you ever have customers interested in tactical shooting training, I might be able to provide some specialized instruction once I'm settled in Colorado. Murphy's eyes lit up at the possibility. That could be incredibly valuable. I get a lot of customers who buy precision rifles but lack the tactical knowledge to use them effectively. Having access to military-grade training could be a unique offering.
There's definitely a market for it, Sarah agreed. Most civilian shooting instruction focuses on marksmanship fundamentals, which are important, but there's limited opportunity to learn about tactical applications, environmental factors, and operational decision-making. Murphy nodded enthusiastically. I've had law enforcement customers specifically ask about advanced training opportunities. Most of what's available locally is basic qualification courses rather than specialized tactical instruction. That's something I've noticed throughout the industry, Sarah said. There's excellent recreational shooting instruction available and basic tactical courses for law enforcement, but very little that bridges the gap between recreational marksmanship and advanced tactical applications. She gestured toward the array of precision rifles displayed behind Murphy. People buy these expensive rifles with incredible accuracy potential, but they never learn to utilize that potential effectively under realistic conditions. Murphy was already envisioning the possibilities. Sarah's combination of proven combat experience, technical expertise, and professional demeanor would be invaluable for customers seeking advanced training. What would that kind of instruction involve? He asked. Environmental shooting, primarily, teaching people how temperature, altitude, humidity, and wind affect bullet trajectory. Most shooters understand these factors exist, but they've never trained to compensate for them systematically. She paused, organizing her thoughts. Stress shooting would be another component, introducing time pressure, physical fatigue, and decision-making requirements to simulate realistic conditions. Range shooting is important for developing fundamentals, but operational shooting requires different skills. Murphy was fascinated by the training concept Sarah described. His customers included hunters, competitive shooters, and law enforcement officers, all of whom could benefit from more advanced instruction. What about equipment selection, he asked. Could you help customers understand which rifles and accessories actually meet their needs rather than just buying the most expensive options? Absolutely, Sarah confirmed. Equipment selection should be based on intended use, environmental conditions, and user capabilities. A lot of people buy more rifle than they can effectively utilize, or conversely, they try to save money on equipment that's inadequate for their intended applications. She gestured toward the M24 system they'd been discussing. This rifle is perfect for my needs because I understand its capabilities and limitations, and I have the training to utilize it effectively. But for someone without that background, it might be complete overkill or alternatively insufficient for their specific requirements. Murphy realized that Sarah could provide the kind of comprehensive consultation that went far beyond simple equipment sales. Her expertise could help customers make informed decisions about rifles, scopes, accessories, and training requirements. When do you think you might be available to start offering instruction? He asked. Probably not until after my Colorado contract is complete. That's a minimum of 6 months, possibly longer if the contract extends. But it's definitely something I'm interested in developing as a long-term business opportunity. Murphy made a note to follow up with Sarah in 6 months. The potential partnership could benefit both his business and her consulting career. In the meantime, Sarah said, if you have customers with specific questions about precision shooting applications, feel free to give them my contact information. I can at least provide guidance about equipment selection and training resources. That's very generous, Murphy said. I get technical questions all the time that go beyond my expertise. Having access to someone with your background would be incredibly valuable. As their conversation wound down, Murphy reflected on how completely his assessment of Sarah had changed over the course of their interaction. She'd walked in as an apparently inexperienced customer making an unrealistic request and was leaving as a potential business partner with extraordinary qualifications. One last question, Murphy said as Sarah gathered her paperwork. That 1,437-meter shot, do you ever think about it? I mean, does something like that stay with you? Sarah's expression grew thoughtful. I think about all of my shots. Every target engaged, every mission completed, every life potentially saved or lost based on my decisions and actions. That's the reality of precision shooting and military operations. The consequences are permanent and significant. She paused, choosing her words carefully. But I don't dwell on individual shots.
What matters is that the training and equipment performed as required when it mattered most. The distance was just whatever was necessary to accomplish the mission and protect coalition forces. Murphy nodded, understanding that for Sarah, extraordinary shots were simply part of doing her job effectively, rather than personal achievements to be celebrated. "Thank you for sharing that story," he said, "and for helping me understand the real-world applications of this equipment. It's given me a completely different perspective on precision shooting and the customers who need these capabilities." "Thank you for taking the time to listen," Sarah replied, "and for being willing to reconsider your initial assessment. That kind of professional flexibility is rare and appreciated." As Sarah headed toward the door, Murphy called after her, "Sarah, that shot in Afghanistan, 1,437 meters. That's going to be a hell of a story to tell other customers who think they need military equipment for recreational purposes." Sarah smiled and turned back. "Just make sure they understand that the distance was only possible because of extensive training, proper equipment, ideal conditions, and, most importantly, the mission necessity that justified taking such an extreme shot. Remove any of those factors, and the outcome would have been very different." With that, she pushed through the door, leaving Murphy alone with his thoughts and a new understanding of what precision shooting really meant in the hands of a true professional.
3 weeks later, Murphy found himself thinking about Sarah Martinez as he processed another customer's request for military-style equipment. This time, a middle-aged man wanted to purchase a precision rifle for long-range hunting, but his questions revealed he'd never shot beyond 200 yards and had unrealistic expectations about what constituted long-range shooting. "The thing is," the customer was saying, "I saw this documentary about snipers making shots at over a mile, and I figure if I get the right equipment, I should be able to do something similar." Murphy suppressed a smile, remembering his conversation with Sarah. "Shooting at extreme distances requires extensive training and ideal conditions," he explained patiently. "Most hunting situations don't require shots beyond 300 or 400 yards, and honestly, most hunters aren't prepared for shots even at those ranges." The customer looked disappointed. "But what about those military snipers? They make incredible shots all the time." "Military snipers undergo years of specialized training. They understand ballistics, environmental factors, and tactical applications that go far beyond recreational shooting. And they're using equipment in life or death situations where the stakes justify extreme precision." Murphy found himself becoming something of an evangelist for realistic expectations about precision shooting. Sarah's story had given him new appreciation for the complexity involved in true long-range shooting, and he felt obligated to educate customers about the difference between Hollywood fantasy and tactical reality. "Let me tell you about a conversation I had recently with a real military sniper," Murphy said, settling in to share Sarah's story with appropriate discretion. Word of Sarah's remarkable shot began spreading through Murphy's customer base, becoming something of a legend at the shop. Murphy was careful to protect her privacy, but the basic facts of the 1,437-meter engagement served as a powerful illustration of what was possible with proper training and equipment. More importantly, the story helped Murphy identify customers with legitimate tactical needs versus those with unrealistic expectations. When someone claimed they needed military-grade equipment for recreational purposes, Murphy would share selected details from Sarah's experience to illustrate the vast difference between tactical shooting and range shooting. 2 months after Sarah's visit, Murphy received a call from Colorado. "Mr. Murphy, this is Sarah Martinez. I wanted to let you know that the M24 system arrived safely and is performing exactly as expected." Murphy was pleased to hear from her. "How's it shooting at altitude? Any significant ballistic changes?" "About what I expected," Sarah replied. "The thinner air reduces drag, so impact points are roughly 2 inches higher at 600 meters compared to sea level data. Nothing that can't be compensated for with proper data collection."
Murphy was impressed that Sarah had already developed comprehensive ballistic data for her new environment. How's the consulting work going? Very well. The client is satisfied with the security arrangements, and we've had no incidents requiring intervention. Most of the work involves observation and assessment rather than active engagement, which is ideal. She paused, then continued. Actually, I'm calling because I wanted to follow up on our discussion about training opportunities. I've been thinking about developing a comprehensive course for precision shooting applications. Murphy's interest was immediately piqued. What did you have in mind? A multi-day course covering environmental factors, ballistic calculations, equipment selection, and stress shooting. Something that bridges the gap between basic marksmanship and tactical applications. I think there's a real market for that kind of instruction. I absolutely agree, Murphy said enthusiastically. I've had several customers ask about advanced training since our conversation. Law enforcement, private security, even some serious hunters who want to understand long-range shooting better. They discussed the possibilities for nearly an hour. Sarah's vision was for a comprehensive program that would teach students to shoot effectively under various environmental conditions, understand ballistic principles, and make informed equipment choices. The training would be demanding, but accessible to dedicated students with basic marksmanship skills. When do you think you might be available to start offering courses? Murphy asked. My contract here runs for at least 4 more months, but I could potentially start developing curriculum and scheduling courses for early next year. Murphy was already envisioning the marketing possibilities. Having a documented military sniper with confirmed long-range kills offering civilian training would be unprecedented in his market area. I'd like to be your first customer, Murphy said. I've been shooting for 30 years, but our conversation showed me how much I don't know about tactical applications. Sarah laughed. I'd be honored to have you as a student, and your shop would be the perfect partner for equipment recommendations and student support. As they finalized their preliminary plans, Murphy reflected on how his encounter with Sarah had changed his understanding of precision shooting and his approach to customer education. Sarah's story had become a touchstone for discussing realistic expectations about equipment and training requirements. 6 months later, Sarah's first precision shooting course was fully booked with a waiting list of additional students. Murphy had become his exclusive equipment partner, helping students select appropriate rifles, scopes, and accessories based on their training progress and intended applications. The course had gained a reputation for being both challenging and educational, attracting students from law enforcement, military, and civilian backgrounds. Sarah's combination of technical expertise, combat experience, and professional instruction made her courses unique in the regional training market. Murphy often attended the courses as both student and equipment consultant, continuing to learn from Sarah's expertise while helping students understand their equipment needs. The partnership had become one of the most successful aspects of his business. During one course, as students practiced calculating ballistic solutions for various environmental conditions, Murphy found himself remembering that first conversation with Sarah. Her quiet confidence and extraordinary story had completely changed his perspective about assumptions about customers and capabilities. The most important lesson, Sarah was telling the students, is that equipment is only as effective as the training behind it. You can have the most expensive rifle in the world, but without understanding how to use it properly under stress conditions, it's just an expensive club. Murphy smiled, recognizing the wisdom that had first impressed him months earlier. Sarah's 1,437-meter shot had been remarkable not just for its distance, but for representing the culmination of extensive training, proper equipment, and mission necessity. As the course concluded, Murphy watched students packing their rifles with a new understanding of their capabilities and limitations. Sarah's instruction had given them realistic expectations about precision shooting while providing the knowledge to continue developing their skills responsibly. You know, Murphy said to Sarah as the last student departed, that story about your Afghanistan shot has probably done more to educate my customers about realistic expectations than anything else I could have said. Sarah smiled. Sometimes the best teaching tool is simply showing people what's possible with proper preparation and training. The distance wasn't the important part. It was everything that made that distance achievable.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.